Edgardo was really tired and he felt very stressed. Some of his cows were sick and he was worried they might get sicker. He thought his day couldn't get any worse, but then something scary happened. A dark shape appeared and his friends screamed. He looked up and saw something unbelievable. Usually, Edgardo spends most of his time taking care of his dogs. He feeds them, looks after their health, and makes sure they are safe. His farm is pretty big in Argentina, but he doesn't see many people except for a friend who helps him from time to time. He actually prefers being around animals more than people. One day, Edgardo heard a strange noise outside his house. He went outside and stood on his porch. Sometimes, wild animals came by and tried to get into his barn to steal food. The wood under his feet made creaking sounds. He waited for a moment, but nothing happened. Just as he was about to go back inside, he heard the strange noise again. This time, he went down the steps and found the creature hiding behind some bushes. What he saw surprised him a lot. The creature was about the size of a turkey, covered in gray fluff, and it had a small bald head. It looked like a very old type of animal. Edgardo stopped and thought that if this was just a baby, he didn't want to meet its mother. He wondered if it was a bird or maybe a chicken with a special condition. Out of all the possible answers, he never expected this one. The chick that was looking at him turned out to be a young condor, a type of bird that is not common in his area. These birds usually like to live in windy places where they can easily glide in strong winds. Edgardo knew that seeing a condor here was rare, so he decided to keep his distance. But then the baby condor started crying. Edgardo couldn't resist and went closer to see if it was hungry or hurt, even though he knew it might not be a good idea. Then he made a shocking discovery. Edgardo approached the young bird as it attempted to flee. However, a limb prevented it from doing so. It hobbled a few steps, but then squawked and collapsed. He bent down and placed a hand on its back. Maybe if it trusted him, it would let him take a look, but he never thought this would happen. Edgardo immediately went online to find the best specialist in birds of prey. Although many would prefer to have the beast as a trophy pet, he did not. His mission was to rehabilitate the animals who could live independently in the wild. He never intended to tame it, but if he was going to help this bird, he needed to make it strong. And he soon discovered what that would entail. Like any vulture, a condor survives by keeping its eyes on the ground for carrion. However, they prefer to feast on large animals. Unlike their ancestors, condors do not have claws as sharp as other predators. However, many still avoid these aggressive birds. Condors have not yet forgiven humans for hunting them for centuries. Edgardo named her Condorito and vowed to take care of her. He wasn't afraid, but he should have been. Edgardo went to the butcher's 3 times a week for scraps and leftover carcasses. He set up a nest for the animal in his shed, fearing she would be trampled by the cattle in the barn. He thought the bird would settle and heal, and she did, but a month later, he returned from the ranch to find she had disappeared. He thought he'd never see her again, but elephants aren't the only animals that never forget. That day, Edgardo decided to walk home from the ranch. The sun was scalding, but it made him feel awake and alive. He had a rough couple of days. A few of the cows were sick from pneumonia, and he and a friend had been out all night and all morning, keeping a close eye on them. Then, a shadow was cast above him. Was it already night? Then his friend shouted in horror as a huge figure circled them. His friend sprinted ahead towards the house. "What is that?" He panted as the dust rose from the footsteps. Then a black mass landed ahead of him, its wings spanning 10 feet. Edgardo paused. His friend fell in fear. What was it? What did it want? Then it ran towards Edgardo. His friend screamed as the animal jumped into Edgardo's arms. Then something clicked. "Condorito, is that you?" He held her face and studied her eyes before she pushed her head into his chest. Finally, she returned to him, but she had grown to a colossal size. Her feathers had turned black, but her head remained bald. She was more like a pterodactyl than a bird. Why had she returned? Condorito was not known to befriend humans. Unfortunately, the giant bird of prey is often a proud display on mantelpieces for many hunters, but their usual area of residence makes them a rare sighting. They only stray from their homes when food is low. And surely enough, Condorito was hungry. Condorito began to investigate her old home, while Edgardo's friend ran to the house to retrieve some raw steak that they'd been saving for dinner. She had taken a long trip from the mountains to get there, so she was without a doubt famished. She was going to love this T-bone. But as he closed the fridge, he heard Edgardo shout. When he returned, they had both vanished. He grabbed his phone and ran. Where had they gone? Was Edgardo in trouble? How could they defend themselves against a creature known to be aggressive towards humans? They had no chance against the giant bird. Then he heard the cows grunting. He sprinted towards the barn, and there Edgardo was, sitting in the dirt beside Condor by the cattle barn. She pushed her head towards him, requesting a rub. As they passed in the hot sun, her wings spanned wider than he was tall, and although his friend was frightened, Edgardo wasn't. He knew she'd just come back to check in, but the story doesn't end there. Edgardo shared Condorito's story online and got lots of likes and comments. Some people praised him for being brave and touching the usually unfriendly bird. They also shared their own scary encounters with wild birds. However, some criticized him, thinking he tamed the bird for fun. But Edgardo had his own perspective. He explained that the experience moved him to tears. His goal was always to let Condorito return to the wild. After she disappeared when she was a baby, he never thought he'd see her again. Her thankful behavior was unique and had never been seen in wild condors before. There have been other cases with different animals remembering their rescuers though. Condorito wasn't the first one. In the late 60s, John Randall and Ace Berg adopted a lion cub called Christian. As the animal continued to grow in their small flat in London, they had no choice but to introduce it back into the wild. A year later, they flew to Kenya, but they were warned that the beast had become wild. However, the animal instantly recognized his friends. Were birds really any different? At first, Edgardo believed that Condorito's visit was a rare occurrence, but surprisingly, she keeps coming back to see him regularly. She likes getting hugs and treats from him. Edgardo feels fortunate to have built a strong connection with this wild animal. It seems like they will be friends for many years. But what will Edgardo do when she comes back with her family?